We are live here to chat about all of the TV that we watched for the last 2 weeks, or in my case, in particular, TV that I watched. Really, it should have been stretched over the course of 2 weeks, but I did marathon it in like 3.5 hours straight. I am talking about Love and Death. I am talking about Queen Charlotte, in case you weren't able to tell from the title, but we're also going to get into The Flash. We're going to get into Superman and Lois. We're going to get into a few other things. But first, hey, Kate. Hey, Carey. How are you guys doing this week? And do you bring news?
Uh, Doing
Hey,
well. Maybe a small bit of news, I'd imagine. I'm sad, of course, that Walker Independence didn't get picked up. That was terrible, gloomy, horrible, no
Boo,
good
tomato,
news.
tomato, tomato.
Um, and not hearing really, really good things about Superman and Lois season 4.
Ooh,
Fingers crossed. I know it's crazy, so I don't know, but I'm bummed.
okay. Well, sometimes you go through these sort of cutthroat seasons where every show you ever watched is axed all at the same time. And sometimes you go through those seasons where literally nothing you watch gets canceled, even though you desperately want it to. So your your plentiful season is just around the corner. Speaking of things that don't ever get canceled, I just finished watching tonight's episode of The Flash. And allegedly, we only have a couple episodes left. So there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not sure if that was as motivational as I meant it to be. Kate, what about you? Any news this week?
no, I don't have any news this
I have a tiny bit of news, and I'm convinced. Okay, I'm not sure if you've seen this going around, but there was kind of this like I don't know, meme, whatever, going around Twitter of like, what's the one show you watched that you feel like you were the only person in the world who watched it? And for me, that was a little show called Cruel Summer. It's incredible. It's like a murder slash kidnapping mystery, psychological. You keep switching perspectives. You don't know who's the villain, who's not the villain. It kind of appears to be like a teen slash young adult show, but they like really go for it with some like dark topics, including like Stockholm syndrome and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, yes, this made for me, made for no one else, perhaps, but made for me. It's getting renewed for a second season. I feel bad mentioning this right after Carrie's cancellation news. It's showing back in my feed this summer. I think it's on Hulu. I don't know. I am so excited. So excited. Apparently, season 2 is going to be like a whole new story type of thing, but with the same like vibe and energy. Stoked.
I want harsher vibe.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll toss that question to you guys before we get into the Flash. Is there any show you feel like you were the only person in the world who watched it?
week. Not current, but probably Victoria. I know I
Mm,
would say Poldark as a secondary, but I know there was a bit of a fan base on that, but
mhm,
nobody ever talked about Victoria.
mhm.
I think there was a CW show called Pandora, and I know you're both asking yourself, Pandora, never heard of it. Exactly, because I was the only person that watched it.
Was it like one or
Yeah,
two seasons?
it was one season. No,
Uh-huh.
no, no, no. It was no. It actually was two. And to be honest, I was really shocked and amazed it got a second season. So in that respect, good things. But I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who's ever watched it, who's ever heard of
I think I heard of it way back in the day, like back when Arrow was first starting, maybe was around
it.
the time.
This would have been in the last handful of years. This is
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of
yeah,
something different.
yeah, sci-fi based. Yeah,
Hmm.
me and probably the writer watched it.
Huh. That sounds really cool. Well, with that, we will transition into the show that we all just finished watching, unless you didn't just finish watching it, and that is also perfectly fine. And I'm talking about The Flash. Now, Carrie, how did you I normally ask how you felt about tonight's episode of The Flash, but let's not go feelings. what did you think about tonight's episode of The Flash? What questions are you still left with? Because I, for one, am still left with questions, and not in the way of like, ooh, it's a cliffhanger. I'm so excited to see what happened this week. I'm more so like, I'm not sure what happened this week.
I don't. I have so many of the questions. I'm so confused. Don't know what I just watched. I really don't. Um, Part of that was because there was an element of the show where essentially um, someone was body snatched, and usually when that happens, or when someone has the ability to do that, there's sort of always this question of, is the person that's on screen talking their actual selves, or are they being hijacked? So there was that element to the episode to a degree. But beyond that, I had no real sense of time or place or plot. I don't know what I don't know what was supposed to happen. And
And
I
they
don't
seem
say
to
that
just
it
like pick up and move sets like helter skelter. Like all of a sudden we were at like newspaper office, and then suddenly we're in whatever that supercomputer room that just looks like a really small like sound recording room from like 1997. And all of a sudden we're back at the lab, and then all of a sudden we're like transition from sets in this episode, just zero effort.
yeah, I couldn't tell. The episode didn't give me a sense of place. I couldn't tell if I was
Mhm.
supposed to be in the past. I couldn't tell if I was supposed to be in the future. I couldn't
Mhm.
tell if I was supposed to be in the present. I couldn't tell if what was happening was real by the way the things that were shot, the way the cameras pushed in, the way the fisheye lens. Everything just sort of seemed out of. It seemed just chaotic. Is the word that I'm looking for. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the sense that they wanted to give, or that's just sort of the sense I took away. But either way, I I don't I don't know what to say about this episode other than it happened.
Yeah, and you have like, okay, so my sense, being generous, is that like some of the chaotic structure and some of this parallel storyline with the Eddie who's not Eddie is that this is introducing to an extent a final villain ish. We get Eddie who's not Eddie, who's actually some other doctor, who then transitions over the course of this episode to essentially howling at the moon at Eddie's grave and becoming Eddie, and, you know, pulling out Eddie's bullets slash organs slash blood, but probably bullets.
Can I cut you off for just a second?
Yes.
Just listening to what you just said, how freaking crazy does that sound saying that?
No, literally. It sounds like a fever dream, and not like in a good way of like, ooh, that was so chaotic. That was such a roller coaster ride. Like imagine if you watched Orphan Black or anything like that. You know the feeling that you would get after sometimes like an Orphan Black episode or maybe like a Black Mirror episode or whatever, where you're like, I feel like I was just taken on a mental trip. That was insane. That's not the kind of insanity we're talking about here. I want to be so clear. It's just a non-continuous storyline where just a random bombshells come dropped out of nowhere. For example, by the way, I love taking a W. There's very little I like more than being right, and there's very little I like more than my faves winning. So am I happy that Caitlin Snow slash Killer Frost slash Keone slash whatever is a goddess of all elements, including the Speed Force, but not limited to the Speed Force, and is essentially inside everybody and able to create metas and is essentially the mother of all whatever, which like don't say she's the mother of all whatever too loud around Barry or he'll fall in love with her again, but like overall she is like the ultimate goddess of all things, essentially the representation of Mother Earth. Am I happy about that? Yes. Am I as confused as everyone else how that was just dropped as a bombshell this episode when technically she's a character we met like 3 to 5 episodes ago? I don't know when it was, whatever. Also, yes. And that's just kind of felt like, am I fine with hybrid werewolf Eddie being like the final villain? Sure, question mark. Like he was fine. He's just sitting here like howling at the moon and remembering that he was in love with Iris, and apparently that has nothing to do with the fact that he's going after Barry. I don't know. But like, I'll roll with it. Like, nothing about any of the plot points is inherently terrible. Just like whoever wrote this was on like some stuff for sure.
Here's my question or concern, because I was watching the episode and I saw the quote unquote credits were directed by, and it was Kayla Marie Compton who had the misfortune, in my opinion, to have to direct this episode. And so I'm wondering if
That's
such
Allegra,
chaotic
right?
and yes,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering if such a sort of chaotic episode, and let's be honest, it's the lead up to the end. Is this? I'm not saying I'm not saying the direction was the problem, but I don't think the direction helped. And I'm just interested to know. w- This is a pretty big deal to have her direct this, and I don't know if she's directed other episodes or if this is the first one, but that seems like a pretty big deal to because you think about this, right?
Within the final
Most
four
of
episodes, too.
right, right. Most of the shows that last this long, when it gets to the end and they want to tell their story, it's usually the premier directors
Yep.
who do the episodes, and it just feels strange to basically be racing toward the end and then just throwing Kayla in there and saying, "Hey, direct this episode that's a little bit disjointed." And I don't know that she could have done a whole lot to marry all those things together, but I think she was put in a poor place. I don't know.
I completely agree. And I know that she was part of a sort of like a mentorship situation where she was allowed to shadow Danielle and
Yeah,
she was allowed to shadow other directors. Love that. 10 out of 10. Like, I remember I was at a con and she and the absolutely drop dead gorgeous woman who plays Cecile. Cecile's beautiful, but she's just like gasp worthy stunning in person, by the way. They were just singing Danielle's praises because Danielle's a fabulous director. We talked about how great she did with the Arrow episode, and I actually just I I did a reunion Arrow Squad episode for those who are 5,000 years old and know what that is. And we were also on there singing Danielle's praises. So I get why someone who shadowed her is then going to want to direct. I I think that in the hands of a seasoned director, some of this could have been salvaged, but also the writing was just real weird. Like, it's giving prelude to the writer's strike energy. Like, this is what we have to look forward to when the true writer's strike hits. This is just a little sneak peek. This was wild. It really felt like ChatGPT wrote this episode.
yeah, and that's again, it's really disconcerting because this is quote unquote their final. They could have basically crapped the bed with every episode they've done up to this point, but this is basically a four-part finale to the series after 9 seasons. There shouldn't be any freaking missteps here. I mean,
Right.
this should be pretty smooth. This would basically the focus of the entire season, and it feel what I can hope is that in the next episode, it I don't mind mysteries, right? Um, so I hope in the next episode they do a little bit more to sort of flesh out what the heck just happened.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know that I should feel this sort of flat on my feet after an episode, and not in a good way, right?
Right.
Um, I don't know.
Not to beat a dead horse. The other thing is the whole time I had no idea if Nora was actually Barry's mother, Nora, another like dimension timeline Nora, like the one who like came and visited and like had a heart again, I love a W, but had a heart to heart with Caitlin slash Keone, not with Iris right before Iris gives birth to her grandchild. That's again, I'm gonna take my W and I'm gonna eat my food, but that's real weird. That was a choice. I want to know what got cut there.
Well, to be fair, that was quote unquote the Speed Force who has a who would obviously have a connection to Keone and her goddess power set, which is freaking
Sure.
strange to say out loud.
Right.
So yeah, it wasn't Mama Nora who, and I don't know. To be honest, I skipped out on a couple seasons of The Flash, so I don't know
Fair.
how they quote unquote avatar. I don't know how the Speed Force channels Barry's mom, or if she just looks like her. Does she have her memories? I don't know how any of that works.
Does
So the
she
fact that
look like Nora just because the Speed Force is in Barry and he imagines her like Nora? Like, there's just some real
right,
weird, like, don't ask too hard questions that spawned out of the season where Barry had a bunch of Speed Force children.
right, and I don't feel terrible sort of pointing out the flaws of this show because here's my expectation. Anyone who's stuck around to watch the show this long, they know what they're getting into. It's not like I'm trying to convince someone to pick it up and watch it now. I'm looking at you,
Right.
Kate, when I say that. Um, but it just feels like it's a little bit of a disappointment in this is what you brought forth, knowing that this is the final run, the final four
Right.
episodes, the really big deal, and it just feels like a mess.
Yeah, it really does. Especially when they switched like executive producers or something at some point, like season 7 or something like that. It's supposed to be like, this is going to be much better because he's more in touch with this, that, or that. It's just like, ooh, man. But sometimes you inherit something that can't be saved. And to that point, maybe it's good that we are chopping this off and we are reassured that Central City and every city and the entire universe and all elements therein are now going to be under the careful protection of Keone. And for that, I will take my chaotic W. I will pluck that out of this messy episode. I will leave all the rest, wish them all well at the hospital, and I'm going with that. Speaking
Well,
of hospitals, let's take a darker turn and talk about Superman and Lois. How was that transition? Not great.
fantastic.
So, in this latest episode of Superman and Lois, we have a few things. We have Lois's dad dating again, Lana dating again, them apparently being at a bar together, having a drink together, but they are not dating each other or in any way getting the CW sprinkle. So we'll leave that and we'll let that lie. We have inexplicably one of the twins becoming a firefighter? Question mark.
I actually
Right.
like that story. I like that story
Okay, never mind. Let me not yuck anybody's yum. Talk to me about that. Do we like the junior firefighter?
because yes, here's why. How many small towns that well, I don't know if you know a lot about small towns, but what generally happens is in a small town is quote unquote if you stay in that small town, you become like a key part of the infrastructure. And let's just be honest, it's sort of like the high school jock who didn't go away to a professional career. Guess what happens? He becomes part of the community. He's either a member of the police department or the fire department. So Jonathan has a desire to want to help, which he gets from his family, and this is a way that he can help. And so I think that's fine, as long as they can feel like they can tell interesting stories that narratively that way. Apparently, from what I understand, there's some friction between he and Jordan because Jordan, I mean, is on this path to quote unquote save the world, and his brother is like, "Hey, let me put this fire out on the corner and get this cat out of a tree." Maybe there's that friction, but it's real.
So you're saying it kind of lets them contrast their abilities, even if, junior firefighters are not going to be sent out to a literal fire, most likely in the line of danger. But it
Well,
allows them to contrast their abilities where we get to see what is, quote, more valuable within the family, saving, small town fires or being Superboy and being able to save everything. So we're going to get this
right.
contrast, and eventually we're going to get Clark and Lois to come in and say, we have to value both, and one can't exist without the other.
Well, think about it like this, right? It's sort of like what Superman's power is supposed to be because he's supposed to be a light and a beacon for the American people, right? And so if he was not that, then everyone who quote unquote wanted to be a police officer or a firefighter would just say, you know what, I don't have to do that because we got Superman here. I'll just wait till my house catches on fire and Superman to come by and blow it out. But no, his inspiration is, well, you can be a hero in your community however you can, and that's inspirational. And I think Jonathan is sort of an example of that. So because again, Superman can't do everything, But if he can be an inspiration for people, help their communities, help their fellow man, then that's what he's about. And I think Jonathan is a great example of what that should look like.
You know what? I take it back. You sold me on the storyline. I'm gonna suspend disbelief and just enjoy it. Because you know what? I really do enjoy the scenes with the two brothers together, and I really generally ignore like the teen parts of the show. For example, I've kind of been off Sarah this season. I love Natalie, but I've kind of been off Sarah. I don't, the whole like the way they're writing like the teen girl attitude thing. It's fine. That's just not a character for me, but that's fine. Like not everything's for me with the two brothers, I still can't get their names straight, and they're not about to be my favorite characters, whatever. But the writing for them is really good. Natalie's still top tier right now, and I'm really loving her Romeo and Juliet sort of star-crossed lovers situation. That was over the top and godfatherish and mafia families fighting at a lovely dinner type of energy, but I love that. It was cute.
Let me go ahead and get this out of the way, and you guys can both gasp as I say it. But I have not watched the last two episodes of Superman and Lois, but but I have sort of done like postmortems on both episodes.
Yes.
And what's really interesting to me, I think, is, and I think we had this conversation sort of a few episodes back, is the nuance and the depth that they are given our antagonists. And from what I gather in the last episode, there was a revelation that came about that adds another layer to quote unquote the big bad for the season being Lex Luthor. And and I think anytime you're able to sort of do that with your villains and give your heroes some credible things to sort of deal with, as opposed to, hey, this thing just happened, let me figure out a way to punch my way out of it. There's a bit of guilt there. There's some hubris that they both have to deal with. I think I said it right, hubris. Yeah, either way. But the point is, they both have sort of fed into what they're going to have to deal with, and I think that's incredibly um, cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. And so I've gathered at least that bit of information from the two episodes that I missed, and I just think that's freaking cool, man.
It is. The Luther mentions were interesting because we were playing sort of like big bad villain Marco Polo this episode and the last couple episodes, just in general, of like who is the big bad and who is behind the curtain and what actually is their motivation. Um, we have the guy, is he actually bad or is he just trying to protect his wife who has cancer? Exactly like Clark is just trying to protect his wife who has cancer. So you have this parallel. You have the Lex Luthor situation. Is it actually Lex Luthor or is it somebody using Lex Luthor's name? And so you have that sort of back and forth sort of struggle of there's probably layers of villainy. There are people on the good side who are probably doing bad things. And at this point in the season, we as viewers are primed to like be ready for the reveal of like the big bad or, lead up to whatever. And they're sort of playing cat and mouse with you being able to determine who exactly is the big bad and who are you, able to, kind of go guns a blazing towards versus who should you actually feel some sympathy towards.
Yeah. Can I ask you this question? And it probably goes back to the previous episode, not the most recent one, but it's apparently there was sort of a sliver of information that perhaps um, there could be some sort of Kryptonian technology that might be able to either save Lois or help, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a discussion uh, that happened on our pod about, well, if there is a possibility of that, um, if that's possible, why aren't you doing sort of everything? And by you, why aren't you Superman doing everything you can do in that regard to save Lois? And so the question is always, um, what should and can Superman do to help his fellow man, quote unquote, the people that he knows and loves, and like the world, right? Because it's like, okay, say, oh, we found this Kryptonian cure for cancer. Um, do I just give it to my wife? Do I give it to the world? Why are you using Kryptonian technology to solve all of Earth's ills and problems? And then once you stop there, or once you start there, then do you start dealing with social ills and political ills? Where do you draw that line? Um, and my thought is always, um, you can help, um, on the ground where you need it, but you can't. You should Superman shouldn't be in the world, shouldn't be in the realm of like being like a god amongst men, basically charting the course of humanity. He can help and guide, but he shouldn't be the one doing that. And so I just was interested in what your thought is about what should Superman do and what should his limits be as it relates to helping the people of Earth.
That's a good question. I think if Superman is supposed to be taking responsibility for anything beyond Earth, then taking a resource that's supposed to be from somewhere else and bringing it to Earth, or spreading technology to Earth that could potentially down the line hurt another, planet or whatever, becomes a consideration. But for us watching this incarnation of Superman and most incarnations of Superman, his only responsibility is to Earth. Earth represents the world, and he represents this sort of like hero savior figure. And if he's only beholden to Earth, then it does become his responsibility to take Kryptonian technology or insert other outside of Earth technology that he may have access to and use it to save Earth lives. The only place that should give him pause is if he's using it to save one or more Earth lives, but it's taking or hurting one or more Earth lives. And that's the situation he's running into with Lois. And it's really hand wavy, at least to me, how exactly that's the conflict of how could this potential technology from Krypton that could potentially help Lois, how could it potentially hurt the world or cause disorder or create a time that whatever. I don't really know, but that's obviously a dichotomy we're supposed to see of like, you could help Lois potentially, but it could hurt the world. So he's not doing it yet. That doesn't mean he won't ever make that choice. But if it was just, is it wrong for him to take a Kryptonian resource and bring it to Earth to help Earth? I would say in this paradigm, no. What are your thoughts?
And no, that makes a lot, that makes sense. But here's my sort of hang up on it, right? So it's like, so should he start? And it's so wide open. But it's like, okay, he's got this technology. Should tomorrow should he just wake up and say, you know what, I'm going to find the cure for cancer, or I'm going to find the cure for AIDS, or any of those ills that basically happens here, or should I develop technology to end world hunger, or any of those, or I see, I'm sort of disgruntled with politicians who aren't doing right for the entire people. So should I just figure out a way to rule us all? And I know that these are incredibly different things. I just wonder where it would stop if he said, I'm going to cure cancer for everyone on the entire planet. It's not going to be an issue anymore. It's like, where does that power and authority and ability stop? And how does that fundamentally change the world that, quote unquote, they live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Is his
because
goal to save the most lives, or is his goal to save the lives of those around him? Is his goal to save the lives of those who have come to him for help? It becomes
because it
what your hero MO is.
Yeah, because again, I think it gets to the point of what Superman is supposed to do. He's not supposed to save us all. He's supposed to inspire us all to do better. And that maybe could be, it's like, hey, I know that there's this technology that's available, or whatever it might be, that can sort of cure these things. And if that sparks a human to
Mm-hmm.
go on this path of trying to create better medicine, then that's organic for the world. But I think when you start bringing those things in himself, it fundamentally changes the course of human history. And I don't think that's what Superman is here to do. I'm saying it like he's really here on Earth, but in that world, I don't think that's what he is meant to do. But that might sort of be what he's up against in terms of, can he use this to save Lois, and would he only use it to save her?
It's a good
I don't know.
sort of ethical question. It reminds me of the ethical question that we had when watching The Good Place, which is sort of like, what do we owe to each other? What does Superman owe to the world versus what does he owe to Lois? In in a sense, him falling in love with Lois, not necessarily in this show, but just in the Superman universe in general, or Superman mythos in general, whatever. Him falling in love with Lois is him falling in love with humans and the world. So him falling in love with the world, or him saving Lois, would be analogous to saving the world. But now within this show, they've created a paradigm where him saving Lois could hurt the world. So we've now separated her from her representation of the world. And that might be causing a struggle this season in this sort of dilemma, because in any other Superman piece, when he saves Lois, he is being the hero that saves the world. Well, Kate, we've talked about death. And that is our transition point to talk about Love and Death, the new show now on HBO Max, which appeals to probably all of us in that it has maybe a somewhat villainous woman. I don't know. She might be like a known historical killer, whatever. But perhaps also equally, maybe even more important, it has a one Miss Elizabeth. So I'm curious, this just dropped a couple days ago. Have you had a chance to get into it? And what are your thoughts so far about Candy?
I have watched one episode.
Okay.
And I have thoroughly enjoyed it so far. It's very interesting watching all of Elizabeth Olsen's stuff come out, all of this work. A lot of my favorite things that she's been in have been TV shows that are very intimate, kind of analysis of a woman in a very tough situation. And it's so fascinating that the previous two were very similar in temperament and kind of emotions. Just one's superhero, one's very realistic. It proves how great of an actor she is at the very least, because of how different this character feels.
Yes.
How much she'll say something, and she believes what she's saying, but you as the viewer, like, how did you get there? What possible hints, clues are you taking from the world around you saying that this is a good idea?
Right. It's bizarre seeing her in this situation. So I asked Kate earlier today if she had seen it. She's like, yeah, I saw one episode. So I was like, oh, cool. And I was going to like watch one episode in preparation for tonight. I'm basically done with the entire show. I've got like 30 minutes left of the finale. I could not put it down. It was my background to work, to cooking, to cleaning. That just was my whole day today. This was a fantastic show. And as a point of reference, I did watch the Hulu version that I think was just called Candy. And I'm willing to watch a different incarnation of a, historical character or whatever, regardless, but especially if it's got Elizabeth Olsen in it, it's going to be great. It also had, what's her name? Kristen Ritter, I believe, who played Jessica Jones. And yeah, it's got her in it and like some other names. I don't know. But with the setup and the way we get to see Candy Montgomery develop, one of the things, and no spoilers, but I'm sure you know the premise of this character in the show. The pacing of the show is so interesting because they don't rush into any sort of psychotic breakdown for Candy. They don't rush into the story, the whatever. This is a very slow progression. And for the vast majority of the series, we are allowed to watch her as this completely, a rational, normal person whose only weird quirk is she has terrible taste in men, just like the worst taste in men. But other than that, like just other than her decisions regarding men and like you obviously you have the ethical issue there wherein she's just having a full-fledged affair with absolutely no remorse. She is a like normal behaving, not psychotic person, just not an ethical person. And we see the not ethics woven into some of her choices of the business she's starting and saying she's willing to lie about her references or whatever. She's just not necessarily on the up and up, but we don't necessarily see how that would immediately progress to being the murderer that we know her to be at the end. So it's so interesting seeing that develop, because in the other version of the show, from the beginning, we're sort of meant to see her as a little neurotic and psycho.
Hmm. I haven't seen the other version, but I'll also say, for as much as the one episode I have watched of this, um, it does feel like she is still rational. She is still kind of a normal person with questionable ethics, of course, and maybe her decision making and motivations are different than what most people's would be. They were able to communicate that while also giving this really interesting thriller tone
Yeah.
for non-thriller scenes. So
Mm-hmm.
scenes that it should just be like the typical, ooh, don't do that when the kind of initial precision of an affair is requested. Normally you would get the ooh feelings when you're watching a show that was covering that. But here there's a level of thriller, horror, like what's gonna happen, uh, tone that they've really brought into just a, pretty average, you know, comparatively safe scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the tone. I love the colors used throughout in order to evoke this 80s vibe without it being like kitschy and try too hard. In the original, it came out like 2 months ago. In the other one, there were moments where it was like 80s props for the sake of 80s props. This one feels a little more organic, but I don't want to like compare, apples to oranges, whatever. This has just been a fantastic show so far. I'm very excited to finish the rest of it. Stormy in the chat says, "Hi everyone, super late to the show." Hi Stormy. She mentioned she watched The Diplomat this week. I've heard great things about it, but I haven't seen it. Have either of you seen it?
No.
That's with Carey Russell from The Americans and several other things. Stormy also says she's making it through Queen Charlotte currently, and she was shocked by a particular ship/couple that pops up in these flashbacks. Have either of you got the wonderful opportunity to watch Queen Charlotte? Because I have watched the entire thing.
Not yet.
I
It's
have
on
not.
my list to watch.
Okay,
So do tell.
it's great. It's better than season 2. It is not a part of the sequential season, so that's not necessarily a fair comparison. But as a viewer, we kind of see it as a season 3 in this whole incarnation of the Bridgerton universe, even though it's a flashback and then also kind of a flash forward that takes place after season 2, whatever. The ship within this, I was really nervous to actually like see people's reactions to it, because I was like, are people really going to like this? Because, and I say this with all the love in my heart, the lead, Queen Charlotte, and we know this because we've seen her in seasons 1 and 2. She is, dominant and abrasive and a matchmaker, and she wants what she wants when she wants it. And, she was basically the villain of season 1 type of thing, both as the younger version and as the older version that we see her in this not season 3 Queen Charlotte. She is extremely abrasive, pushy, borderline rude, borderline cruel, in the face of her kids facing infertility or loss or like super serious things. But she is like she holds that line firmly in the center of not being your, perfect Pollyanna heroine, but then also not being like an evil, awful villainess. Like she holds that middle ground of like, she does objectively some bad things or says objectively some bad things, but also is like a good person who does some good things too. And I loved it. I ate it up. Like, 100 out of 10, but I was nervous to like see what people would think because I was like, is anybody else gonna like her? Because I feel like she is like made for like online misogyny, like she is made for people to be like, she was awful and terrible and cruel, and how dare she do this? And this was, insensitive, or this is, this is reminding me of abusive parenting, like whatever it is, which like super fair, whatever. But most people seem to like it. So I'm gonna take that as another W. I hope you love it as well, Stormy, Kate, and Carey. If or when you watch it, I hope you love it as well. If you want your perfect, shiny, nobody does anything bad ship, this might not be it. But then again, this is King George, who, like, was a figure in the Revolutionary War or something, technically, kind of, maybe. So great, good talk. 100 out of 10. Kate, let's talk about the other thing you watched this week, which I put on our agenda, but I don't actually know what it is. What is A Small Light?
So it is on National Geographic, Hulu, and Disney Plus. We're really covering all the bases here.
Okay.
Um, it is a show documenting the life of I, I don't know how to say her name. But it's the woman who housed the Frank family during World War II.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh, and it follows her before the war and kind of the decision to start helping the Franks and as it's going along. So there's I think there's actually 4 episodes out now. I think the first two, um, and it's very, very good. It it's it has a really interesting tone it's really fascinating to me how well they've been able to document how dark and nerve-wracking and just scary that time would have been in Holland, um, but also keep moments of levity and just coping with humor and real life. Um, and so it's just following her and the process of meeting her husband and kind of taking this situation in stride and trying to rise to the occasion of this horrible events,
Mm-hmm.
helping the family. It's very, very well done.
That sounds nice. I'm going to add it to my list. It sounds like a really excellent show. I had, it vaguely sounded somewhat familiar, but I wasn't sure what it was. Well, Queen Charlotte already got worked into the discussion. So, Carey, we have now arrived at what you have watched this week, or I guess I should say what else you watched this week, as you sort of just watched The Flash at the very least.
Yeah, or pretty much what I have not watched this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's NBA playoffs, and so I've been watching a lot of basketball. Um, and so yeah, that's pretty much where it's been. Like I said, I haven't even watched the last 2 episodes of Superman and Lois.
Mm-hmm.
I am bracing myself. I still haven't finished watching that episode, The Last of Us, the Ron Swanson episode.
Episode
So
3. Yep.
yeah, I have to brace myself because I have no idea what's going to happen. But based on my television viewing so far, I see what's happened so far, and I also know that something bad has to happen. So I've been bracing myself by watching plenty of episodes of Parks and Recreation, seeing all of the good, happy Ron Swanson before I subject myself to something that could end terribly. So that's what I have been watching. Um, by the way, Parks and Recreation is such a fantastic show, and they probably
10 out
have
of 10. So good.
one of the best finales I've one of the best finales I've ever seen on television. I mean,
Literally.
people always say, well, you don't want the quote unquote cliche sort of ending where everyone goes off into the sunset and they're happy. It's like, screw that. That's exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, like
Exactly what I
I do
got.
want a happy ending. I do want everybody to go off into the sunset. At what point did I ever indicate anything otherwise?
Well, see, that's the thing. It's like that's what people want. And truth of the matter is, in life, you never really get that, right? But in a
Right.
television show that you spent so many seasons watching and loving the people in it, you want to see that. And I'm so glad that they gave that to us. And funny thing is, I didn't come to the show until late, so I sort of watched it out of order. And I'm pretty sure I watched the finale before I ever saw the pilot. Um, which is probably, from what I understand, a good thing because I understand the first season they were sort of trying to figure out what they wanted to do,
Yeah, the
and
first
it
season's
wasn't.
wild, just like whole main characters that never show up again.
Yeah, and so it was sort of the second season, from what I understand, where they sort of found their rhythm, and so that's cool and that's fine. But yeah, I will catch up on The Last of Us because I obviously I did listen to the fantastically awesome Arrow Squad pod, and so and yeah, I knew that Martin had been in an episode, and so yeah, that's really cool. So I certainly want to make sure I finish that. So whenever you guys can sort of like get together and get him on here, I'd love to talk about it, being like fully caught up like everybody else. So
That is
I'll get that. I'll get
definitely
that done.
on my summer plans. The second you get caught up on The Last of Us, I'm going to see if I can get Mr. Martin the Flash to pop up on this live and chat with us about The Last of Us and his experience there, and also what else he's been watching on TV these days. Because I hear he's been watching more than just The Flash and Superman. There's a lot going on over there in his world.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
fun stuff there. Well, I know we only have 2 minutes left, but Kate, I am going to force you back up here again because you watch The Good Doctor. However, you are not what we might call chronically online. And by that, I mean you have a life and don't spend entirely too much time on like social media and in fandom spaces like I, for one, do. So imagine my surprise when I told Kate, I was like, okay, I have to take a second on tonight's live to talk about the Good Doctor memes and, what's going on there. And she was like, the what? So you're up here for moral support as like the rational person who's like touched grass a reasonable amount of times recently and is therefore not invested in this. I have been subjected, dare I say assaulted, for the last few days online with the Good Doctor memes just constantly going around. Now, the Good Doctor is not the world's most popular show, so I'm not exactly sure initially why am I constantly seeing the Good Doctor and this clip of. It was started at first, particularly this clip of like the main guy from the Good Doctor, played by Freddie Hightower, whatever his name is, going, kind of super upset and kind of throwing a fit and, stating that he is a surgeon, whatever. Now, as you know, Kate and Carey, you may also know, he plays an autistic surgeon. And in this particular situation, he's having a bit of a sensory overload meltdown. He's frustrated, and there's some other things going on. And so he's kind of he's pitching a verbal fit, and it's in an office. It's only to one person. It's not necessarily a meltdown in front of everybody else, but there also have been meltdowns that this character has had in front of like the whole staff before. So this is not a every episode or even every season occurrence, but sometimes we do see the frustrations of this because we are following the path of a autistic doctor. Now, I have a few bones to pick with this memeage. Not the first of which is the people poking fun at this are mostly saying, like, this show is stereotyping autistic people. This isn't how autistic people behave. Autistic people would just get super wrapped up in wanting to talk about trains, and I can't remember what the other example was. They cited one particular video game. They have and they won't stop talking about that. That's the true autistic representation. I'm like, first of all, that's incredibly offensive. Second of all, for any like neuroatypicality, there's a spectrum. It is true that there are some people, and the show, by the way, covers this, by the way, very well if you ever watch it. There is a spectrum, and there are going to be people who are on the high functioning end of the spectrum, and then there's going to be people in the middle, and then there's going to be people who have a difficult time functioning in regular society. So just the complete out of touchness of like the level of neuroatypicality that this particular fictional character is experiencing, and how that is different than what they might have experienced in either, whatever they've experienced in real life, was extremely frustrating and not necessarily offensive, because again, you're talking about a fictional character, but also just like a raging level of stereotype. Number two, a lot of people were contrasting him with House, a notably undiagnosed historical TV doctor, but who did, in fact, at many times, and Kate, you're probably too young to know about House, but whatever, it many times exhibited like some like atypicality in, whatever he was going through. Just two totally different diagnoses, my friends. Just like, and that, like, literally, okay, I know you both are like normal people, so you have not seen this incredibly pervasive discourse in every corner of the internet over the last few days. Just literally, I mean, don't do this, but if you want to know, just search like the good doctor memes and you'll see what I'm talking about. The level of like ignorance is astounding. And it's so funny. Like, I can't even be mad. Like, I'm trying to like go on a rant and I can't stop laughing about it, but like, people have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. Anyways, that's all. The Good Doctor is a great show, and you all are haters. It's entertaining, but I just need to make sure you know. Not you specifically, you in the royal sense.
Yeah. It's funny, like, after you mentioned that, and I had to ask what it was, I did eventually see a meme of sorts, but I still didn't understand the full scope of it. But it was just like it was kind of saying what real autistic representation would look like. And I remember there were a handful that I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like the guy from Community
Mm-hmm.
and a couple other characters. I was like, oh no, that makes sense. And then I can't remember any of the characters' names, but I just knew that it was supposed to be some like heartless character that was kind of more talked about. Oh, it was Dexter. And I was like,
Dexter, the
no,
killer?
yes.
Oh, no.
I was like, no, no, no. Like, I'm not gonna say what I've seen of the Good Doctor that is 100% the best representation every time, all the time. But like you said, every experience of autistic autistic people or anything atypical like that is a spectrum. It's a
Mm-hmm.
unique circumstance. Things are gonna look different for every person.
Mm-hmm. There was a personality
Why?
beyond the
Yeah,
neuroatypicality. They're like,
yeah,
no neuroatypical nor neurotypical person is just like a monolith wherein if you are this, you act the same, and if you are that, you act the same. Like, somebody was like, why does he hold his hands that way? That's not what autistic people do. Actually, no, flapping is an extremely common characteristic, even used at times as a part of diagnosis. And not everybody has it. Like, it's just like this Twitter WebMD situation. Anyways, that's all. I know we're like 5 minutes over time, but I, again, have been subjected to this for the last, I don't know how many days. And I just needed to, get it off my chest, as it were. Stop hating on a show that you know nothing about. Asterisk, keep hating on a show you know, but also, well, my stage 10 is telling me that we are hitting our time limit. So I will bid you farewell. And all the information to fight with Kate and Carey is in the comments, but they are normal, well adjusted people, and probably
And
won't give you. What now?
if someone can explain to me what happened on the Flash, I'd love for them to reach out and tell me.
Please tell Carey what happened on The Flash. Please talk to Kate about Elizabeth. That's the wrong direction that I'm pointing. Please talk to Kate about Elizabeth Olsen in Love and Death, and or anything else she's ever been in. And fight me about The Good Doctor. I'm prepared. I'll be even more prepared. Bye.